Though the Lord works in mysterious ways, and the universe brought me something. As I get further into my journey, things have been popping out and just synergistically happening. And I came across this talk just by some random events, a couple interviews, and as you may know, that I've been really deep into meditation and um, energy, frequency, vibration, and how it all ties to disease. What is disease? Well, this homeopath, her name is Barbara Wren, she had a talk 9 years ago. This was, I found it, and we're going to do something a little different today. And we're going to go beyond the carnivore diet, beyond, nutrition even, and get into some really cool um, thoughts about what disease is and how light and electricity and all of this plays into it. I urge you to listen to this with an open mind, and I'm gonna do a little bit of a play by play on my thoughts and tying this into sort of my what I've come to believe. And I'd love to hear what you think about it. This is only part one. It is long. It's about an hour, and but when you've got an open mind, and if you're like me and you're curious about why, this is crazy cool. And it puts a lot of things into perspective, and it's interesting. I found it quite fascinating, mind-blowing, in fact. So I hope you enjoy it. It is long, apologies for that, but we're going to do part two. Give me a little chance to do some editing, and this I'm going into a little bit of uncharted territory. I've never done one of these videos before, but hopefully you enjoy it. If you like it, I'll put the link to the full interview or to the full talk below, and enjoy with homeopath Barbara Wren.
Well, this afternoon I want to bring energy and matter together, and want to start off from the concept that we are a resonance. And perhaps the resonance that we are is the manifestation of light, slowed down light.
It's interesting that she says this because uh, something that's been, you know, quite clear is, over the last few years, I've not had a sunburn. And there's something to be said about photons and how it works. And if you look even at Barquet's description of a calorie, what it comes down to is light. We are light. We're built of light. So it's interesting as she says this, not to mention Nikola Tesla saying if you want to find the secrets of the universe, look into frequency, vibration, and energy. And this kind of hits home.
Creating matter with the other influences. But we have a physical form, and this physical form exists between above and below, between heaven and earth.
Another little snippet here. One of the biggest books that have influenced me, especially on my, you would call my spiritual path, was the Kybalion, which is basically the seven Hermetic principles, natural law, seven natural laws. And one is as above, so below, as above. And as within, so without. And this sort of coincides with this as well.
And when we experience dis-ease, there is a change in the resonance. And particularly, there is a change in the resonance of the affected part if it is a localized disease rather than the entire being affected by it. And so I wanted to share with you what I have experienced, if you like, about three of the big players in how this change of resonance becomes physically manifested. And the three big players I would like to speak about are fats and oils, calcium, and sodium.
Now, I think she's going to get into it later, but when she's meaning fats and oils, she'll explain it. But this ties into the whole seed oil, vegetable oil, if you will, um, problem. Remember, this talk was 9 years ago.
Calcium and sodium always move around together. They're joined at the hip. So before talking about these three big players, which demonstrate by their misplacement the imbalance and the dis-ease, I'd just like to go back and talk about the cell. The perfect situation is in the morning on waking, and the nucleus should be positive, inside the cell membrane negative, and the outer cell membrane should be positive. So we have positive, negative, positive.
Now, another law is the law of polarity. Everything has poles, and if you look at the magnetism, the polarity of the Earth moving in a toroidal energy, magnetism moving in a toroidal shape, and electrolytes. We always something we overlook is dehydration and electrolytes, and specifically in the carnivore space, a lot of people have these problems, and when it comes down to dehydration, your electrolytes are sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium. It's neat how she's explaining and laying it all out for you how they work, because there is something inside the cell called the sodium potassium pump. I think she calls it a calcium doorway. Anyway, it opens the door and allows for the nutrients to come back and forth, but it's deeper than that. It's to do with electricity, and we are electric, we are magnetic, and we are light, and it all coincides here.
And the differential between the inside of the cell membrane and outside is hugely, hugely important. If we were actually able to measure that, it would be a perfect way of measuring the resonance also in physical form of that cell. And it's a triple layer. The inner and the outer, as we say, holds a charge. The core, the center, does not hold a charge. And the fatty acids and fats are involved in the formation of that.
So, what's basically meaning? Your cells are constructed of fats. There's a lipid layer around the cell, and what that cell is made of probably has a lot to do with what we're putting inside our bodies.
And within that, we have been taught there are these things called calcium gates, which operate like a computer gate, allowing things in and out. And so we can envisage the cell as our microcosm and the manifestation of how much of the macrocosm we can bring in and register within our microcosm. And so we'll look to see in this time of how dis-ease is diminishing. It is a diminishing macrocosm. So the cells, the microcosm, is a diminishing picture of the full potential.
That's kind of what if we're made of food, if we're made of the food we eat, this makes perfect sense. A lot of people, I've even talked about this in my videos about how people use band-aids to treat symptoms. You heal you. So this is going deeper. This is going into the cellular level, from the micro to the macro. What's going on inside your body is going to show on the outside with a lot of different things, with your energy, your mood, the state of your health.
As I said, we live between below and above, between heaven and earth. And if we, as such, integrate the different energies, it's kind of life itself. And in this particular situation, we could just look at the electron donation from the Earth and the photon light energy from above.
One big trend, if you will, but maybe not even a trend, just an alternative therapy is gaining traction, especially when you look into it scientifically. And what she's explaining right now is grounding, getting grounded to the earth. It's the ultimate antioxidant. It's an electron donation balancing thing where you are grounded to the earth, and if you're getting the proper sunlight, that is the natural order of it. So, you know, my feet are grounded right now on an earthing mat below my desk, and I think there's a lot to be said about this. You know, with uh, our modern ways, we're so they try and disconnect us from this natural process.
So we mentioned the charge of the cell. The perfect situation is this very strong positive charge on the outside of our microcosm, so that it can attract the maximum amount of electron energy, negatively charged subatomic particles, which we think are very much to do with earth substances, and particularly food.
So this ties in a lot of stuff, and I think a lot of it has to do with the function, your body's ability to function naturally. And health is free. It's everywhere. We just don't see it. And we've been told that we have to do this and have to do that, eat this and eat that. If you take a step back and just look at like even in the carnivore space, why people are healing, it's because I think that they're giving their bodies the structure, the right kind of energy, and the ability to actually heal. And you know that we'll get into the debate about whether it's plants or not. I think it's context. And what she's demonstrating right now is a deeper look into not only nutrition, but actually what nutrition does. Because we often look at nutrition as what's on the package, what's in there, but it doesn't take in account what state of your body and the bioavailability of the nutrients and your ability to process the nutrients that you're putting inside.
And because you have a charge involved, then you have this easy attraction. Then it is thought that the photons become trapped in this. No charge to them, but there is this light which can be measured, this photon energy caught around each cell. And it is that that attracts the oxygen. So the perfect cell, in absolutely perfect form, will make its energy, its ATP.
And you notice how she's not saying calories here. This is ATP. This is what happens in the mitochondria, in your cells. The fuel gets parceled and packaged and recycled and spun around, and it has to do with a lot of just different factors than 4 calories in a gram of carbohydrate, or 9 calories in a gram of fat, or 4 calories in a gram of protein. She's talking about at the molecular level, light photon activity and absorption, and the electrical charge, which is what we're made of. Like, our cells are batteries. There's so much electricity flowing through us, and I think it's one of those things that's overlooked for sure.
80% from photon energy transmuted and used, and also as the form of oxygen. So we have 80% oxygen being used and 20% glucose. That's to make ATP.
Now, another thing here is she says glucose. but it doesn't mean getting your glucose from carbohydrates or carbohydrates being the primary fuel source or your preferred fuel source of your body. It's when you look at essential nutrients, our bodies, our livers specifically, and I think she'll get into this later about the liver function, but your liver will make the exact amount of glucose required in an optimal functioning body called gluconeogenesis. So getting your carbohydrates from your diet aren't essential, and it's so important. Glucose is so important that your body knows how to make it from things. So she's not saying we need sugar. She's saying your body requires glucose, which is very different.
In the perfect cell, 80% oxygen, 20% glucose. Now, we have a moving scale in disease manifestation. For those of you who are familiar with the work of Béchamp, you will have heard of microzymas. And you may remember that he is the man who had the completely opposite view to Pasteur. Béchamp said disease is from within, from the soil within.
It's kind of like the germ versus terrain theory, and Pasteur and pasteurization. When we look in history about how we deal with disease, we look at deficiencies or when a disease, like for instance scurvy, lack of vitamin C, rickets, lack of vitamin D, beriberi, lack of B1. Throughout history, they've tried to solve the problem with enriching our food, which that there's arguments there, but pasteurization was to stop infection from the dairy and like from well when you destroy all the bacteria in the food, you're sterilizing it in a sense. Like I'm not talking exact here, but Pasteur and this guy had were butting heads, and now you just have to look at how many people are doing really well on raw dairy, unpasteurized dairy, non-homogenized dairy, and that just shows that you know they sacrificed the few for the many, I guess you could say. Anyway, it got blown way out of proportion, and it is pasteurization. It's probably worthy in some contexts, but to just blanket everything, now it's illegal to buy raw dairy in Canada unless you own your own cow, and I'm pretty sure in some states as well. But it's interesting how this all came to be, and that's why we're trying not to be narrow-minded, trying to keep our minds open, and we have to look at the whole picture as opposed to just one thing.
This is what the ancients called the humours. Pasteur said, no, you catch it from outside. Not your responsibility, guys. It comes along and gets you. However, on his deathbed, he did say that Béchamp was correct. Now, he talks about these microzymas, this very, very, very small thing, which influences the state of the cell. It's the same in biodynamic gardening. Steiner knew about this at root formation, influencing how the plant would form. And it is known that there are 16 stages from the perfect, the microzyma, until you get to mycelial. And all of these different stages, you can move backwards and forwards depending upon the soil. And so you can have bacterial manifestation that then can go back to mycelial. You can have viral, you can have mycobacterial, you can have nanobacteria, all of these different forms that the medical profession have put names on can be changed by the humours, the condition in the body.
Also, when we the biggest debate on the planet is the environment, and one thing that's overlooked, and it's and this concerns everybody, is the soil. Our topsoil is being ravaged, and is being depleted at an exponential rate without the proper ecosystems and the proper soil biodynamics, the soil health, we're not around. And it's not just the plants and animals. It's the cycle. You need the fertilizer to create these ecosystems underneath the soil, and the bacteria and the fungus and all that stuff that adds the nutrients to the roots of the plants. So we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but it's the cycle of life. The ecosystems are being destroyed by these monocrop agricultures and the fake fertilizers and all the industry that goes along with what they're saying is better.
And what is interesting is that each of these stages changes the way the cell operates. So we have the perfect situation, 80% oxygen, 20% glucose, until we get to mycelial, which is 80% glucose and only 20% oxygen. So it's going to be showing us how much the charge of the cell has changed. That cell membrane potential is going to be so weakened that it cannot attract the electrons to it and trap photons to attract oxygen.
That comes down to breath, sunlight, and minerals. How important is it? And we are getting told to wear sunscreen and stay out of the sun. Look what happened over the pandemic. Stay indoors. Not to mention stare at your screens. And that's a whole other topic about blue light and light toxicity.
So there is this sequence of events, of this harmony, of living in resonance between heaven and earth. It's all about the energy.
And if it's all about the energy, that just shows you that being in balance, being in resonance, being healthy does not mean eating this or that. In fact, it probably means all the fake food and all the garbage is very disruptive to the whole dance, the whole system.
So how does this manifest? What is going on here? We start to change the way that the cell operates. And I want to preface this by the way we have been taught, because I personally believe most of what we've been taught is probably wrong.
Remember, this is 9 years ago. And reverse engineering this stuff, you're looking at a lot of different factors. But if you look at what functional and disease is, it's hard to deny that the stuff she's talking about doesn't play a pivotal role in it. And there's clues everywhere. We're just, too blind to see it or too ignorant. And, you look at the cholesterol stuff now, especially now with this study that just came out, the lean mass hyperresponder study by Dave Feldman and his colleagues. And they've shaken the tree big time. And we won't get into the details of it, but the people in the cholesterol space are already attacking them. Instead of just opening up a discussion and asking questions, it's attack, trying to slander them, trying to critique and the validity of the study. And there may be holes in it, but why can't we just talk about this stuff without pointing fingers and without blaming and without, being absolute? It's the way science is, black or white. And that's not the definition of true science.
So we are taught, or were taught, that sodium and calcium move into the cell through these gates during the daytime under the sun influence. And it will push out its opposite. So calcium will push out magnesium, sodium will push out potassium. And at night, the process is reversed because the charge of the planet changes on which we live. And we have a difference in terms of availability of photon energy. And so then we are taught that the sodium and calcium will leave and the potassium and magnesium come back in. Well, what we now are aware of, and probably always have been aware of from ancient times, but it being changed, and certainly in the world of homeopathy, I've always been aware of it, and within the work of Steiner, there are not enough of these gates for this exchange to be physical. The majority of this must be by transmutation.
That gets into some of the stuff that, through the esoteric texts and the ancient texts and wisdom, and it's the old philosopher's stone, turning base metal into gold, transmutation, an alchemical reaction. Could this mean that our bodies, being light vessels, absorb and expel light? And if the process is disrupted via certain deficiencies or inadequacies, disease occurs. Fascinating.
So what are we saying here? We are saying that when the energy changes, the form, the manifestation changes. Because you can no longer be talking about sodium and calcium going in and coming out if there isn't enough facility in the physical way for this to happen. And we know that the amount of oxygen and photons present has an enormous influence on transmutation. In fact, is the energy that is required for this to take place.
Circadian rhythm, your light cycle. This stuff matters. Getting light in your eyes, daylight, sunlight, is as early as possible. Getting your clock sorted out, and then when the sun goes down, not overdoing your suprachiasmatic nucleus, if you will, with blue light and all these fake bad lighting that cause an imbalance in this whole system. It's wild.
So if we hold that as that going from 80% oxygen to 20% oxygen, how do we see a physical form of dis-ease? And we can think of a cyst or tumor or something like that. If we become dehydrated, the body will always look after us, and it will start to produce cholesterol to coat the cell membrane. You can see pictures of this quite rod-like structure of the cholesterol interwoven in this triple cell membrane. And as soon as that happens, it's going to influence this exchange of this day-night exchange of the sodium calcium.
She might have just answered the plaquing question. We know plaquing is calcification, like the coronary arterial calcium score, the Agatston test. Basically takes a picture of your arteries and shows plaquing and the calcification. And we also, if this process is already dysfunctional, you probably be prone to plaquing. And when she's talking about the cholesterol here, she's also talking about not being the problem, being the fireman, responding to the fire, and is present during this problem, not the reason it started in the first place.
and the potassium and magnesium, it's going to be interrupted. And so we are going to have a change of the charge of that cell. And what you find is that sodium and calcium starts to be left inside the cell. And when we're thinking of calcium, we're always thinking of a more hardened structure.
Calcification. You know, and a lot of people, like in the health and wellness space, talk about calcification of things, the solidifying of things. Maybe this is a pathway here. It's not the calcium, you know, and probably just taking a bunch of calcium carbonate, limestone is not the answer either, because it's not organic, and it's already probably just like disturbing the balance of this. So this is quite amazing that she's talking about the stuff, but she's just talking about the mechanism. Yet we are so into what causes this. It's a few things right now. We've looked at lack of proper sunlight, not being grounded to the earth, um, dysfunctional cholesterol, not being too much cholesterol, being the it's reacting to something, the structure of your cells in your lipids, what your adipose tissue are made of. You know, I think all of these things have a very, and then obviously the vitamins, because the vitamins help the minerals. So, you know, where do you want to get your nutrition from here?
So the cell starts to manifest this hardness, which creates a drop in the resonance of that part of the body. So resonance and where calcium and sodium are placed, and resonance, they're so dependent upon each other. So as soon as we are dehydrated, and we can talk about reasons, and the cell goes on to this defense, then the first thing that will happen is a hardening.
That's fascinating, because we know electrolytes are very important, and sugar pulls water into cells, comes with water. So if you're disrupted from the water you're drinking, and this probably comes down to why you need good water, not water from the ocean or not distilled water. You need parts per million, a high parts per million mineral content, good minerals, and naturally probably would have got that from the runoff and the rivers running through the earth and picking up this stuff, and we drink it. So, you know, it's crazy. Filtering and just chlorinating and fluoridating your water, it's probably not a good idea.
The hardening and the lowering of the resonance of that part of the body, which means there are fewer electrons and fewer photons available to that cell.
And also, if you look at the UK, like I lived there for 4 years, their water is so hard. If you leave like your kettles, you got to descale the kettles, because the lime scale comes on, you know, like really, really badly. It's got to be happening in your body too. You know, like this is not, probably too much is not a good thing. And it's calcium carbonate. That's what your calcium supplements are. I think I'd rather get my calcium from cheese.
So that cell is starting to drop away from the bigger information picture. It's taking itself gradually out of the perfect rhythm and resonance to this more hardened, more cut off situation.
And also, if you look at the work of Dr. Ben Bickman, he wrote a book called Why We Get Sick. This ties into metabolic dysfunction and metabolic health. If your mitochondria are dysfunctioning, that's disease. Thomas Seyfried out of Boston College. If you haven't heard of him, Google him now and check out what his cancer research is unbelievable, and he's being silenced because it works. And he talks about metabolic. Cancer is a metabolic disease, not a genetic disease. And it's unbelievable how all of this ties into it. And it's we overlook this stuff and treat one thing and treat it like black and white. There is so much gray, and this is explaining why a low carb, animal based diet probably takes away from all this taxation of vegetable seed oils and sugar.
So, what creates dehydration? In the East, they know that the water element holds fear and anxiety. The winter is the time of the water element, the kidneys and the bladder being the organs involved. So any kind of stress on a person will have a physical manifestation. We cannot operate just looking at the physical or looking at the energetic.
There's some research done. There was some research done by Masaru Emoto, and he was basically doing like taking water and either putting love, good, high vibrational emotions into it, and then freezing it. And the crystals, the like snowflakes, basically, like when they got frozen, were beautiful and organized and beautiful and just magical. When he put anger and rage and jealousy, projected it into the water, and this is exactly what it sounds like. He yelled at the water. He got mad at the water. When he froze it, it was chaotic and disorganized and it looked angry. So if that's happening on a microscopic particle level, the earth is made about 70% water. We're made about 70% water. Maybe the frequency, the vibration, your state of being, your resonance has so much to do with your state of being, your health. It's unbelievable how this turns into that, turns into this, turns into that. And so many things are getting sort of overturned here.
Part of life. You have to see how the two interact. So the energy of stress felt by the body will be registered on the water element, the water component, as dehydration. And in the East, they know that if this has been registered for 2 years, the body will go on to what we call dehydration alert. And at that point is when the cholesterol is used to protect the cell from dehydrating to death. But
so, like the theory of Thomas Seyfried's theory of cancer, cancer is a survival, a last ditch effort survival mechanism. The cell is no longer able to function normally. It has to start fermenting. Instead of oxidative phosphorylation, breathing, respiring, the cell mutates to ferment sugar. And it's that sounds exactly what it is. So it feeds on the sugar. It hardens. Probably a lot to do with the stuff she's talking about.
If you wish to move the story on, you cannot leave that dehydration alert situation there because already that cell is compromised.
Also, a lot of the dehydration is minerals. It's mineral deficiency causing dehydration. You're low in electrolytes. It's not necessarily water.
Already it's moved out of communication. Already it started a slightly hardening situation. And so we need very much to give the body the reassurance that it is not dehydrated, so that the brain can return to its 80% water and the body to 70% water. And this is done via the message coming from the colon. Very, very important, because when we're looking at deep dis-ease, we are looking at really deep dehydration, a big drop in resonance of the area and a hardening, this calcium deposition and this cholesterol production. So that very to be switched off. So let's go and look at the three big players that I mentioned. Fats and oils, calcium and sodium. Over the last maybe 2 years, it has become very obvious to me that most people cannot break down fats and oils. And
I think what she's talking about here is the polyunsaturated vegetable seed oils that are dominating the food, big food. And it shows like they're volatile, they're prone to oxidation. And if your lipids are made from this stuff, your adipose tissue, your fat is dysfunctional to begin with.
the liver is compromised. And the liver is the organ that controls hydration. The kidneys are the filter.
And also, if we look at non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is growing exponentially, especially in children, so we know that something's happening. There's a lot of evidence pointing towards fructose being damaging to the liver, causing a fatty liver. And if that's the case, then it's a combination of everything. So if you're eating, as Ivor Cummins calls the devil's triad, refined carbohydrates, vegetable seed oils, and lots of sugar, you're in a lot of trouble. And the liver shows. And Dr. Robert Lustig, in his book Metabolical, explains food, real food, protects the liver and feeds the gut. Anything else is poison.
So the liver cannot afford to be compromised by fats and oils that it can't deal with. And the most difficult fats and oils are heated fats and oils.
That's digging into trans fats. When these vegetable oils are heated, especially in deep frying in restaurants, heated up, cooled down, heated up, cooled down, they are getting structurally weaker and weaker and weaker, and you are putting this into your body, and it is poison.
I mean, they've even, it was in a broadcast where they're saying they think one of the main contributions to the best health in the nation of the Japanese is that they very rarely heat fats and oils. I mean, they eat their fish raw, for example.
And that digs into the omega-3s from fish, from saturated fat. Well, even though omega-3 isn't, but when you're the omega-6, they are essential fatty acids. They are found in nature. But when we assume this standard diet, and there's people talking about this all over the place, is the omega-3 to 6 ratio. A natural ratio would be 1 omega-3 to up to 4 omega-6. 1 to 1 being optimal, arguably. The standard diet now is up to 1 omega-3 to 24 omega-6, 1 to 24 ratio and above. 60% of some people's diets are these seed oils. They are everywhere. And if you don't think you eat soybean oil, look at your dressing that you just bought.
And so I think it would be very important for people to look at the amount of fat and oil, particularly heated fats. I mean, if you look at the really unhealthy end of the spectrum, all the biscuits, the cake, dare I mention pasties, pastry, all of those things. But also to look at what percentage of calories are being taken in the form of fats and oils. I mean, the number of
9 calories per gram, and they don't distinguish between good fat or bad fat. So when you look at it from a calories perspective, getting 60% of your diet and maybe even 40-50% of your diet calories from polyunsaturated omega-6 fatty acids, what do you think that's leading? That's the snowball effect. It's showing it right here. This is it. And what she mentioned, all those carbohydrates, I think it's both together.
people I know who consider themselves to be eating very healthily who'll eat a whole bag of nuts in a day. These are a concentrated food. You know, they are the seeds for the next season.
And I think there's something to be said there about seeds being heavily protected. So, I don't eat nuts anymore because I believe in the anti-nutrients and the phytic acid and all the bad stuff that sort of blocks the absorption of the proper minerals. And it's a plant defense mechanism. The nuts are the seeds. They're the protected part of the plant. And not to mention, I don't know if you've looked at how many calories are in a handful of peanuts, but I guarantee you can't just eat one handful. And if you want to raise all the the fat content of your diet, chomp on some nuts. They creep up before you know it. A couple handfuls are thousands of calories.
And seeds likewise, they're in dormant form. So when you start looking, you see that people are taking in a huge amount of their calorific value in the way of fats and oils, and particularly the heated fats and oils. And although we know that the fats that are safer to heat are the saturated fats, the ones with no double carbon bond.
She just said it right there. When you look at what the fats that you are consuming, what it's actually, what kind of fat it is, there is a very big difference. And I encourage you to learn about this because this makes sense on so many levels.
I would like to suggest today to you that you should avoid as much as possible in your diet heating fats and oils, because otherwise you're going to overtax your liver, your organ of hydration. And it's only when your hydration is operating well that your lymph can operate and your body can cleanse, your immune system can be strong.
Not to mention, your lymphatic system has no heart. So movement, this is key. Movement. It's not about this or that exercise. It's about getting your body moving.
So if we overload the fats and oils, the liver cannot break it down, and it then goes through the lacteals in the villi in the small intestine straight into the lymph. So often the first sort of illness that we see in our young children, sore throats, ear infections, where there is sluggish lymph drainage to those areas. So there is some congestion and stagnation that is taking place in the lymph. The lymph then drips into the blood with each heartbeat, and the left side carries the lymph from the whole body, including the left ear, apart from that part of the head. The right is the drip in of the lymph from the head, less the left ear. So it's easy to see why this side usually undergoes the largest problem of stagnation of lymph.
It's interesting too that cardiovascular disease starts on the left side, or symptoms anyway. Usually, you get the numbness in the leg or weak arm or tingling in the arms on the left side. It's interesting.
So here we have this lymph which is not flowing in the way that it should, draining into the blood. And the effect upon the blood is to have clumping of red blood cells.
Now that also ties into iron and functionality of your red blood cells, which have to do a lot to do with B vitamins. So tying this all together, where do you want to be getting your nutrients from?
Which starts to affect the oxygenation. And equally, we have lining of the blood vessels and affecting the glucose escape from the blood into the cell to help make the ATP.
And that's showing that glycation, advanced reactive oxygen species, free radicals, glycation, advanced glycation end products, all of this sort of ties into exactly what she's saying.
So it's very, very easy to see why there is so much heart disease when you have this process going on, starting with the dehydration, overtaxing the liver, the organ of anger and planning and structure, so that it's going straight into the lymph, into the blood, and affecting just the whole movement. So the entire being of the person is stagnating and the resonance of the energy is lowering. So it's kind of the beginning of solidifying. And at that stage,
and it's in another point too, is when we're sick, we're low, we're blah, we feel down, low, heavy. When we're healthy and feeling good, we're higher, we're lighter, we're in flow. This makes sense from an energy standpoint.
is when we have inflammation, because body doesn't know how to work against us. So inflammation, heat, organisms there, bacteria, viruses, whatever label we wish to put on, to resolve that situation of stagnation.
Chronic systemic inflammation resulting from dysfunctional metabolic health.
And toxicity in that area. But if we carry on pushing on, increasing this situation, the body ceases to be able to do this inflammation, this localized inflammation. And again, that starts to go out of communication. So I really would encourage you to look at your fats and oils. I mean, if you go out and just stand looking, go look at what they sell in a health food shop window if they're cooking things. I mean, you just look at the bag of the amount of oil that oozes out of most of these things. So it's a huge percentage of intake. And also remember that carbohydrates, fats, and protein exist together in almost every food. I mean, if I say to you there is 9% protein in a sweet potato.
That's a little bit of an argument. I mean, we got to look at protein, break it down into amino acids, and there is not your full spectrum of amino acids, let alone the limiting factor of lysine or leucine, which lets muscle protein synthesis happen. But that's for another topic. I think what she's trying to say is it's not really what we eat, it's what we eat.
We have got used to putting these things into separate categories.
Or maybe she's just talking about whole food being whole food, real food being real food.
Then, if we look at the other big players, the sodium and calcium, and really I would like to concentrate on the calcium, just knowing the sodium travels with it, because it's very easy for us to understand this drop in resonance where this is dropped out of solution or placed neatly within the cell. The huge thing that has been forgotten is that for healthy bones, It is not calcium, but silica that we need.
This is something I didn't know, but it makes sense. A lot of the, like, people like swear by diatomaceous earth, and certain silica maybe being a chelator of heavy metals and sort of a detoxifier. It might make sense.
It is so important. And if we start looking at transmutation and we start looking again at Steiner's work, it is the silica we need to keep everything in place. It is the grit and determination in homeopathy, the oat straw. It's the structure. And apparently, I was told yesterday by an astrologer, we now have, after the eclipse that we've just had, which was to put everything from the past down. It is no longer relevant. And with Saturn sitting in Scorpio, we have restructuring.
For all of the astrology people out there, 4 years ago, I would have said this is crazy. Understanding how this whole cosmic flow works, it would be pretty ignorant to tell people that these big electromagnetic uh, shapes and things in our solar system with big gravitational effects don't affect us on a molecular level. How much it does, it's probably up for a lot of debate, but to say that it absolutely wouldn't doesn't really make sense to me.
Saturn is about structure, and silica belongs in there. So I think we need to take a long, hard look at the importance of silica for keeping everything in the right place. Very interesting that silica did not get through the positive list for supplements.
That's kind of funny too, because look what happened with vitamin D in the pandemic. All of a sudden it's not talked about. It's like NAC, N-acetylcysteine, taken off Amazon. Ooh, why not? Why do these people not want us to know? That really strikes me, actually, this silica thing, because if they're not willing to recognize it as something, there might be some reason and some. Probably have to do some research into that.
So we have to look elsewhere. You can go and buy your magnesium, but you cannot go and buy silica as a supplement. But it is absolutely crucially important for the placement of all these things. So we've talked about hardening in terms of calcium deposition, and we know as homeopaths that silica also ejects what we don't want. Anything alien.
So that's like a chelation for heavy metals. So it's probably a good idea to think about these things. I mean, how we're affected by heavy metals, I think, is a very real thing. I mean, there's arsenic in brown rice, for Christ's sakes, in the husk, and they did some studies on baby food, and you'd be horrified to see how much arsenic is in. Yes, the Gerber food, like the baby food, it's horrific. So heavy metals being contaminated by them is probably a real thing. It's worth a look for sure.
Is ejected, pushed out by silica. So it is this really important part for us to understand. When you think of the sort of prescribing that goes on for osteoporosis, it's complete insanity. The sort of things that are created, because we do not want this calcium dropping out of solution or being placed and hardening. We don't want people to lower their resonance.
So that also ties into vitamin K2, and K2 is found mostly in animal foods. It's also found in animal fat like butter, and sauerkraut would be the vegetable that I know of. But that also has to do with the synergistic effect of calcium, magnesium, vitamin D, and vitamin K. All have to do with how calcium is being mobilized, and it makes sense to make sure that you're sufficient in vitamin K.
We want people to be elevated in touch and much lighter in that way. The sources of silica, one of the richest sources, you look at the very big grasses. So if you look at sugarcane, for example, when they crush sugarcane, it's actually very, very rich in silica. Bamboo, barley grass, nettles,
So this does not mean go eat sugar.
horsetail, they all have a structure which is rich in silica. So we can make teas in order to augment.
Now, I'm not, there's a lot of arguments there about tea. I think it's probably the context of the person consuming it. There's probably a lot of good things in teas, and there's quite a few bad things in teas as well. I think it would be worth it as an alternative, short-term remedy for something. I think teas. I mean, we've been looking at herbs medicinally for thousands and thousands of years, so that seems to be plausible for sure.
The diet, which is very, very important again, to stop this hardening, to push it back to where it belongs for the formation.